York City. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. Treading water, stocks struggling for direction as markets look to new catalyst following Monday's crypto sell-off. Peace plan talks, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff heading to Moscow to meet with President Putin. And a new round of bidding for Warner Brothers Discovery, including a mostly cash offer from Netflix. So let's take a look at those markets after that crypto sell-off yesterday. Was it the start of something? Was it a catalyst, or was it just exacerbating a feeling that was already in markets? We definitely saw the S&P 500 down 0.5%. The Nasdaq 100 was down 0.4%. And futures were lower until just a few minutes ago, and now they are pointed higher. Are the markets looking towards next week's FOMC meeting, or is this just because Bitcoin has turned positive again? We'll ask our guests today, but certainly there is a fragility out there. Let's move to the bond universe, because we did see some steepening yesterday. So while we saw equity sell-off, we also saw bonds sell-off. We're back to 4.73 on the 30-year yield. The 10-year yield just now again below 4.10, but it was above 4.10 earlier, and that 2-year yield at 3.53. Don't forget, we don't get more real data until after that FOMC meeting. The 16th and 18th of December is when we're expecting some jobs data and some inflation data that will be maybe a little bit less stale. So all eyes towards that. We do have a few AI companies reporting as well today. All right, let's get to some individual pre-market movers now. Over to London and Chloe Melly. Chloe.
Good morning, Vonnie. Bayer over in Germany is up very impressively this morning after the Trump administration urged the U.S. Supreme Court to take up Bayer's appeal related to lawsuits against its Roundup weed killer. So this is a product that's been accused of causing cancer, and this is a latest development that means that Bayer might be able to throw out some of those Roundup cases, and therefore we're seeing the stock move almost 12% higher this morning. Moving on to Warner Brothers and Netflix, which are also on the move today after Netflix reportedly submitted a mostly cash offer for Warner Brothers. This is part of a second round of bids that also involves companies like Comcast and Paramount, and we'll have the outcome of this auction in the coming weeks. So something to keep an eye on. But in the meantime, we are seeing both of those moving higher today. And finally, across the software sector this morning, we are seeing some positive movement after MongoDB reported stronger than expected results and also raised its outlook. So that really is driving those shares this morning and also driving up the rest of that sector, with peers Snowflake and Datadog also moving higher today.
Certainly a nice gain there from MongoDB. Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Melly there. And coming up this hour, we're going to speak to Katrina Dudley of Franklin Templeton on the persistent market volatility setting the tone for 2026. Well, global markets off to a shaky start then, it seems, for December after a sell-off in cryptocurrencies. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Morwenna Coniam. Well, we might change the tone today. Morwenna, futures have turned positive, but what caused this crypto sell-off?
Well, it seems to be a combination of things, but that nervousness that we've seen coming through from the AI trade has been really being felt across like the tech sector, as well as we've seen a big sell-off in cryptocurrencies, particularly yesterday. That's seen a bit of a rebound today. It's been fluctuating a bit, and it really does seem to be that the broader equity market is very much following that. What we've seen is some of those trades where the kind of never-ending price increases in crypto have been coming off. There's been a lot of nervousness there, and there's that sort of fueled momentum, which doesn't necessarily play out once you start seeing the price of Bitcoin and other crypto assets actually dropping. The strategies that some of the funds that have built around it doesn't work anymore. So there's a nervousness there, but it's also coming through from the broader anxiety around the AI space as well.
It's a real head scratcher when equities are taking their cue from cryptocurrencies, right? But I'm curious about bonds as well, because we did see a sell-off in the bond universe too. Was that related?
Well, I think where was concerns about interest rate cuts, we also saw that coming through, particularly from Japan yesterday, and that's eased off a bit today. So a bit more stability there. More broadly, when we're looking at the bond space, we've got big central bank decisions coming up this month. And that is what will be really driving that. We've got the FOMC. Of course, we're in the quiet period now, so we're not really hearing anything more from them until we get those that meeting in about 9 days' time. Whereas, and the Bank of England is also due to potentially cut interest rates later in the month. So there's a bit of a sort of vacuum at the moment of really tangible news. Like I said, we had that speculation coming over from Japan. But otherwise, I think that the market is drifting a bit today with the lack of tangible economic data to base any real direction on. And as we said, it's sort of becoming a bit beholden to this drift in crypto assets.
Yeah, as you said, 7 more trading days, I think, before we get that FOMC decision. That might be the next catalyst. Morwenna, thank you so much. Morwenna Conium there. And now to a Bloomberg exclusive. Streaming industry leader Netflix offering mostly cash for Warner Brothers in an auction that could wrap up in the coming days or weeks. Joining us with the latest is Bloomberg Tech Europe anchor Tom McKenzie. So Tom, what do we know about this offer?
Yeah, so it'll be an almost all-cash offer from Netflix. There are other parties that are offering as well, making bids for Warner Brothers. Of course, includes the Warner Brothers Studios, CNN, of course, on HBO. But Netflix looking to a loan to fund this. In terms of the price tag for Warner Brothers and its assets, they're looking at about $30 a share. The company is currently valued at about $60 billion US. But you also have Paramount in the mix and Comcast as well. Paramount looking at potentially liquidity from Apollo, but also maybe lending from some Middle East funds as well. And as you say, look, this could all wrap up in the next day or so, next couple of days, potentially in the next week, because these are binding offers, and therefore the board at Warner Brothers can take them pretty quickly if they land on one offer that they prefer. But Netflix coming in, Netflix not keen on CNN and the streaming parts of the business, but they do want the studios and they do want HBO.
Yeah, it was a busy Thanksgiving for bankers involved in these bids, yesterday being the deadline for the second and maybe final round. I wanted to ask you as well about Michael Burry, because we have some more news. Apparently he's shorted Tesla on the valuation and Musk's pay plan. This is according to a report from Fortune. I mean, I guess he's not the only one to be short Tesla, right? But it's a dangerous short, I guess, aren't they all?
Yeah, I mean, Tesla's stock price year to date up 6%. If you compare that to the Nasdaq 100, up 21%. So it's certainly lagging the broader tech-heavy index, of course. Michael Burry, of course, with the short-famed around 2008, 2009 in the real estate sector, of course, that obviously paid off handsomely for him. So closely watched. He has a short position that he revealed as well against Nvidia earlier towards the end of November, in fact. So now we have this short position that's been announced again, according to reports in Tesla, saying that it's just well and completely overvalued in terms of the stock. But also, to your point, talking about that potential $1 trillion pay package for Elon Musk and calculating that it could lead to dilution for shareholders of around 3.6% per year, 3.6% per year. That is the Michael Burry calculation in terms of that pay package. He describes the shares currently as ridiculously overvalued. Yeah,
exactly. I wanted to ask you about this carousel of AI executives. We now have the Apple AI head, John Giannandrea, leaving, and his stint was pretty chaotic, Tom, to say the least.
Well, they missed, didn't they, in terms of their own AI models. Apple Intelligence is seen very much as being subpar compared to their competitors. The updates around Siri have been delayed, and that all coming under the leadership, of course, of Giannandrea. So now he's being sidelined. He'll officially be out from April of next year. And it's a reminder of the catch-up that Apple is playing when it comes to generative AI and integrating some of those solutions into their hardware. They're even, and we know, are in talks with Google as well about potentially using Google models. And that has led, that's part of the reason why there's been this brain drain out of Apple. A lot of their key names working on large language models and machine learning have left, a lot of them, to Meta, about half a dozen. So this is the latest change at the top of Apple. They brought in someone else. He was the vice president at Microsoft AI just for 6 months. Prior to that, he was at Google for about 16 years, Amar Subramania. So watch him in terms of what impact he'll be able to have at Apple. Again, having moved, talking about talent war carousel that you mentioned, 16 years at Google, 6 months at Microsoft, and now he's moving to Apple. Let's see if he can execute the changes that Tim Cook wants to see.
Yes, exactly. Tom, thank you so much for all that context. That is Bloomberg Tech Europe anchor Tom McKenzie. And in geopolitics, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff set to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin today in Moscow. It's his 6th meeting to try and sell him the latest version of a Ukraine peace deal. Joining us now is Suzanne Lynch, Bloomberg's Brussels bureau chief. So will Steve Witkoff put pressure on Putin, Suzanne, or how does this work? It's the 6th meeting this year already.
Yes, this is the question. What is going to happen in this meeting between Witkoff and Vladimir Putin? Well, I can tell you that a lot of Ukrainian allies, the Europeans, are quite worried about this. They're well aware that they're not at the table. They're not part of the discussions, and neither are the Ukrainians. So they will be hoping that Witkoff and the Americans have moved substantially since the emergence of the 28-point peace plan that really set out a vision of peace very much within Russia's wish list, if you like. But there is concern about what this conversation will generate. We're expecting it to take place at some point this afternoon. But as I say, Ukraine not at the table, and neither are the Europeans on this one.
Yeah, Zelensky coming out and saying, you know, the language in the new draft of the plan looks better, but it also doesn't solve the territory problems. I want to move to a different theatre because the White House now defending the Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth, over a second strike on that alleged drug boat in the Caribbean. Obviously, it killed the 2 survivors of the first strike. And there is percolating in the atmosphere now the idea that this could be some kind of a war crime, or could be at least accused of a war crime. Suzanne, how likely is this that the White House, the US and the Defence Secretary will be accused of war crimes here?
Well, so far, Donald Trump, the US president, is sticking by his defense secretary. The White House press secretary yesterday made a robust defense of these actions, saying there had been a second strike, but was all within law, etc. I think what to watch here, though, is the views of the Republicans on Capitol Hill, members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, for example. They are asking questions now. They want to know exactly what happened. Did the Defence Secretary give these verbal orders, as has been reported? And it's a bipartisan issue, as I say, Republicans as well as Democrats looking for answers. Now, the White House has said they have been in contact with these members of Congress. They have been assuring them, if you like. But I think that's where the pressure point is going to come here for Donald Trump. This story may become increasingly difficult for him.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not the first time he's been under fire. Now, when it comes to China and rare earths, it seems that US firms are now actually looking to Europe, snapping up rare earths from there because, you know, there's so many problems with getting them from China at the moment. Can you tell us any more about that, Suzanne?
Yeah, this is a great piece we have today on the terminal about how US companies are winning this global race vis-a-vis the Europeans when it comes to securing some of these rare earths and other critical materials that are so vital for everything from defence to electric vehicles, etc. It comes in a week where the European Commission is going to unveil its own plan called Resource EU about trying to step up its supplies of critical materials and diversify away from China. We were reporting that overnight, details of that plan. But our reporting is showing that US firms have got more money behind them and are moving quicker on this. And it really is a sense now, I think, that belatedly a lot of countries, US, European countries, are realising the depth of their dependence on China. And as we have been writing, US firms showing that they are pipping their European rivals to the post, as it were, in terms of securing alternative supplies of critical raw materials.
It's a fantastic story. US firms snapping up the rare earths Europe needs to rearm. Suzanne, thank you so much. Suzanne Lynch there for us in Brussels. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. The US Commerce Department has agreed to invest as much as $150 million in Xlight Inc. It's a chip technology startup tied to former Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger. The investment is part of the Trump administration efforts to bring more chip-making capabilities back to US soil. Samsung has unveiled its first trifold smartphone. The Galaxy S Trifold has 2 hinges, allowing it to transform into a tablet-sized device. It's initially being rolled out in South Korea from December 12th. The price tag, almost $2,500 US. Hong Kong's leader, John Lee, pledging to launch an independent committee to review systemic causes behind the city's deadliest fire in nearly 8 decades. Authorities have now arrested 15 people on suspicion of manslaughter and corruption over the blaze, which left at least 146 people dead. Coming up, we hear from the Taiwanese Foreign Affairs Minister on the clash between China and Japan and the Trump administration's commitment to Taiwan. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. The dispute between China and Japan shows no signs of slowing, and officials warn it could drag on for a year. Bloomberg's Stephen Engel spoke with Taiwanese Foreign Minister Chia-lung in Taipei in an exclusive interview.
So we have very good communication channels with the Japanese government. So we are trying to manage the situation to avoid it's become a situation out of control. So, because...
So are you saying you're downplaying it? Because
yes.
The response so far from Lai Ching-te, the president, has
yes.
been fairly muted.
Yes. So we show our support through, I think, a soft approach, suggesting that our people to travel to Japan, also to eat Japanese food. So we want to help cool down the situation, because once the Chinese nationalist sentiments stimulated, it will very, to some extent, out of control. So I think for Beijing, it also not in its interest to escalate the conflicts.
Do you believe, though, with Prime Minister Takaichi-san essentially linking Japan's security to Taiwan's security, does that indicate to you that Japan is willing to shoulder more of the security requirements, either diplomatically or militarily, in the East Asia? Yes, indeed.
I think we have to share the burdens in terms of defense capabilities, and also through diplomatic way to co-manage the situation in the Indo-Pacific. So it's I think the situation shows that we are coordinating with the United States in defending the status quo, trying to avoid the Chinese authoritarian expansionism in this region. So in the Indo-Pacific, we don't have a collective security arrangement such as the NATO. So we have to strengthen our bilateral cooperation, and even to bring all bilateral arrangement into a latest strategic framework.
Right. Well, this downplaying of the situation is in lockstep, I guess, with why Taipei was fairly pleased as well that Donald Trump or the White House did not mention Taiwan in the readout of the recent phone call between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, where Beijing tried to make the case again for the post-World War II order, basically cedes Taiwan to the rightful leader of China, and that being, after 1949, being Beijing. Obviously, with Donald Trump not mentioning Taiwan, it takes it off the front burner, but at the same time, it does not allow Donald Trump a chance to reaffirm America's commitment to Taiwan. Do you question, under the Trump administration, their commitment to the defense and support of Taiwan?
We have no doubt on the Trump administration's commitment to the regional security in the Indo-Pacific, especially the first island chain. So I think it's a different kinds of strategic arrangement.
How is it different?
By asking the U.S. allies or to have this burden sharing in terms of defense budget, or to show our determination and resolve to defend ourselves.
Our exclusive interview there with Taiwanese Foreign Minister Chia-lung. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Time now for your front page news. First up, the Wall Street Journal leading with the White House defending Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth over a second strike on alleged drug running boat in the Caribbean that killed 2 survivors of a first strike. The Journal says some members of Congress and legal experts are asking whether the orders may have contributed to the commission of a war crime. The White House says the head of Special Ops Command was acting legally under authority to use lethal force granted by Hegseth. Next up, the New York Times leading with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's visit to Moscow, saying the White House has strongly pressured Ukraine to agree to a peace plan. The Times reports Ukrainian geo-monitoring group Deep State found in November that Russian forces almost doubled the battlefield gains they made in September, highlighting increasing strain on Ukraine's military. And finally, the Financial Times reporting UK pension funds are pulling back from US stocks on fears of an AI bubble. Also concern over market concentration in a limited number of stocks. And those are your front page headlines. Coming up, we'll speak with Katrina Dudley of Franklin Templeton. This is Bloomberg. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. Treading water. Stocks may be turning it around, but they were definitely struggling for direction in the last couple of hours as investors assess the stakes before next week's FOMC meeting. Come following the storm, that crypto rout seems to be abating. This after nearly $1 billion of leveraged positions were liquidated Monday. And we have Steve Witkoff traveling to Russia to meet Vladimir Putin for a 6th time this year. So let's take a look at those futures then, because we've turned higher in the last hour or so. We had been lower after a choppy session overseas, but as you can see, the S&P, NASDAQ and Russell 2000 futures all pointing to gains at the open. Now, yesterday we had that massive rout in crypto, but was it a catalyst for US equities to sell off, or was it just a symptom of something underneath the surface, a little fragility or a lack of direction, because we don't have that many catalysts? We do have a few earnings after the bell today. We get CrowdStrike, Okta, Marvell and so on, but really earnings season is over and the next data doesn't come out until after the FOMC meeting next week, or the next most up-to-date data, let's put it that way. We did also see a bond sell-off, though, which was interesting, curve steepening. The 30-year yield now back up to almost 4.73, and that 10-year yield was above 4.10 earlier this morning. All right, let's get to some individual pre-market movers now, a few hours before the US Open. Let's get to Chloe Melly in London. Chloe.
Good morning, Bonnie. Bayer over in Germany is up very impressively, more than 10% this morning after the U.S. administration urged the U.S. Supreme Court to take up Bayer's appeal related to lawsuits against its Roundup weed killer, which is a product that has been accused of causing cancer. This is a litigation issue that has been plaguing Bayer for years, and this development means that it might be able to throw out some of those Roundup cases, and that's seen as very positive for that stock. Moving on to Netflix and Warner Brothers that are up also this morning after Netflix reportedly submitted a mostly cash offer for Warner Brothers. This is part of a broader process that also involves other bidders like Paramount and Comcast, and we'll be getting the outcome of that auction in the coming days or weeks. And so we are going to be looking out for that. And in the meantime, we are seeing those positive movements across those two companies. And finally, we've also got green across the screen for the software sector this morning after MongoDB reported better than expected results and also raised its outlook. That's really driven the stock this morning, and rising also are some of its peers like Snowflake and Datadog, so that's good news for that sector as well.
Chloe, thank you so much. That is Chloe Melly there in London. Katrina Dudley, senior investment strategist at Franklin Templeton, says persistent market volatility is shaping fund flows and setting the tone for 2026. I'm pleased to say she joins us now and in studio. So, Katrina, that is the broad picture. But just want to ask you about this move in the last 24 hours, basically, in yields. So we repriced and it looked like we were all set for the Fed. And now we've got this curve steepening. What's going on?
I think what you're seeing in the Fed is like you've got two sides of the coin and they're debating each other, and we're seeing that debate happen in public. The odds of a Fed rate cut in the December meeting, so next week, has really increased substantially. It's now up almost at 80%. And you're looking at that rate increase and you're comparing it to the fact that the Fed is looking at inflation data and they're looking at unemployment. It looks like on the inflation side, people are getting pretty comfortable that inflation is under control. I'm not quite yet there in that camp, but on the employment side, we started to see some weakness. We started to see a little tick up in the employment, and people seem to believe that that narrative is going to dominate headlines, the unemployment narrative, and you layer that in with the AI concerns that people have about the job market, and particularly younger people being hired into companies.
Yeah, there are a lot of concerns out there, but just on the pricing and repricing. Yeah. Last time you were on, which is not that long ago, the market was not pricing in a December cut, and you agreed with the market then.
Yes.
Do you agree with the market now that it's almost a done deal?
No, I actually don't believe it's a done deal. I do think that the people are going to wait. I think that the data that we're looking at coming in is a little delayed because of the government shutdown, and I think they're just going to take a pause in December, and if we need to in January, where they have a little more data and they have they can set the tone for 2026, I think maybe you'll see a cut there, but I'm actually not in the camp that we'll see a cut in December.
I mean, it was fascinating how the market just turned on its head after those Williams comments. That was really the beginning of the catalyst for pricing in a cut in December, right? But as you say, if the Fed waits until January, I mean, will the market be roiled? By the way, I should mention that there were all those comments, Nick Timros in the Wall Street Journal saying the ground had been laid and stuff. It wasn't just the Williams comments.
Exactly. But the fact that are we talking ourselves into forcing the Fed into that rate cut scenario? And I'm in the camp that the Fed really is independent. I think it is very data dependent. And I don't think you've had enough of a move down in the inflation numbers. So if you look at why we're concerned about inflation, you still do have the residual effects of tariffs that need to come through the data. The holiday season is going to be where you see a lot of that price action, and we're hearing it from consumers. We're hearing it. There's a little bit of sticker shock as they walk in the front door of those retailers. So I think the inflation narrative isn't quite done, and we've yet to have the deflationary impacts of the AI and everything there, because that's the offset to what you're seeing in terms of underlying inflation that is coming from items such as, defense spending over in Europe is being higher, is not another inflationary force that we see. So we do see a lot of these pressures in the market.
What about the labour market? When you look there, do you see weakness? Or are you just only concerned about inflation?
I think we're looking at the labour market as being relatively stable. I think the unemployment numbers have slightly ticked up, but I think slightly is the word there. I think what we're getting confused with here is a lot of people are looking at their own college graduates at home and saying, hey, they haven't got a job yet and we're in December. But I think that as we go into January, people get very comfortable that, earnings growth is there, that companies have got, a good outlook going into 2026. GDP is a strong growth driver, that they'll start hiring again. So I'm actually optimistic about, the ability of people to get jobs and keeping that unemployment number low.
So you seem to be pretty optimistic about the economy in general,
yes.
Then. Are you as optimistic that the stock market will see that reflected in whatever the Fed does?
Look, when I look at the stock market, I think the bears are telling you valuation, beware. And I think what we're saying is look at underlying earnings growth. If you look at just the third quarter, so just take that very narrow period, we actually had forecasts of 6.5% earnings growth. We came in at 15. That's a significant beat across a very broad part of the market. If I look at the market generally, breadth has been the key to all of this. It's not just a few stocks. The Magnificent Seven that are doing the heavy lifting today. It's actually a broad brush of stocks. 2/3 of the stocks in the market are up, only 1/3 of them are down this year. So we do think that we've got breadth. And if I look at the 2-year forward stack of earnings across multiple sectors and multiple geographies, we're looking at numbers in the high teens, low 20s as driving, earnings growth. And it's earnings growth that really do drive markets higher.
You've maintained that investors have been climbing this wall of skepticism, not a wall of worry, but a wall of skepticism. Will it take some kind of a negative event to wash that out? Or what, once skepticism is in there, isn't it like, undermining the foundation of something?
If I take a look, a wall of worry to me is actually a lot more negative than the wall of skepticism. So I think the market is gradually getting, those bears are getting a little bit, their claws are coming in a little bit. They're not quite as bearish as they were, and that's why we shifted from that language of a wall of worry to a wall of skepticism. You are always going to have skeptics in the market. And, sometimes they will be right. As I mentioned just before, 2/3 of the stocks in the S&P 500 are up this year, but there's still 1/3 of those stocks that are down. So there's always going to be fodder for those skeptics. They're always going to find things to do. But as we look, I think that the setup going into 2026, you're starting to see, analysts come out with estimates. We're starting to see those forward outlook reports. And I think generally speaking, we're looking at a number of positive things driving earnings. We're looking at strong earnings growth. We're looking at inflation under control, and we're looking at that AI narrative.
So the choppiness has been due to fund flows to some extent, at least. Where are you seeing those funds flowing now? And are we still looking for a Santa Claus rally?
I don't think we want to be talking about a Santa Claus rally. I do think that we're going to see volatility going into year end. And I don't think that we want to be in a position where we feel uncomfortable that volatility is going to drive the narrative. We think that it's earnings growth driving the narrative. So if you're really leaning into volatility, you're right. You may be looking at a Santa Claus rally one day, and you may be looking at, the Grinch coming in the second day, driving that push and pull. When you have a situation where you've had Fed cut rates, on a year-out basis, you do have about a 17% return, average return on the S&P, but it does come at the cost of higher volatility. So we think that the historical playbook is actually playing out here. So, yes, I don't think you're going to be looking at a significant rally into year-end, but I do think that you've got a positive momentum.
All right, but it might be a bumpy ride. Katrina, thank you so much for joining us today. That is Katrina Dudley of Franklin Templeton. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Netflix offering mostly cash for its latest bid for Warner Brothers Discovery. Paramount, Skydance and Comcast are also bidding for all or part of the company. Sources say the offers are binding, which means the board can sign off on a deal quickly if its goals are met. Samsung has unveiled its first trifold smartphone. The Galaxy Z Trifold has 2 hinges, allowing it to transform into a tablet-sized device. It's initially being rolled out in South Korea from December 12th. The price tag, nearly $2,500 US. Bayer shares are higher after the Trump administration urged the U.S. Supreme Court to take up its appeal targeting thousands of lawsuits blaming Bayer's Roundup weed killer for causing cancer. The Roundup issue has plagued the German conglomerate since the takeover of Monsanto back in 2018. The company has shelled out more than $10 billion in verdicts and settlements over the herbicide. And coming up, high-stakes peace talks kick off today in Moscow. We're going to get the details next. This is Bloomberg.
And on the topic of security guarantees, we have concrete details from the U.S., concrete details from Europe. I'd say these are the 3 main topics, tracks, but also triggers. We need to be very careful here. I thank our negotiation teams. The plan looks better.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky there on the latest version of a peace plan. His comments come ahead of U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow today. Joining us now is Ben Sills, Bloomberg Managing Editor for European Politics and Economy. Ben, how does Zelensky back himself out of this corner that he seems to have been put in by the U.S. and obviously Russia, this peace plan, and the fact that the Europeans don't seem to be funding a war that Ukraine is now on the back foot on?
Yeah, it's really tricky for Zelensky, isn't it? I think that what we can see from the way he's handling it at the moment is that his strategy is to publicly go along with this US-led process, to try to look constructive, but also to hope that something happens so that this process will fall apart before he faces a real ultimatum from the White House.
Yeah, I mean, Vladimir Putin made the claim that Russia had taken a city in the east yesterday. It's hard to know what to believe, but, you know, what do we know about that and the advances that Russia is making into Ukraine?
Well, that city of Pokrovsk in eastern Ukraine has been the site of really serious street-to-street fighting for weeks now, with the Russian forces penetrating the city, the Ukrainians holding it out. The Russians probably could have claimed that they were controlling the city at, you know, any point in the last week or two. They could have waited another week. It's a very, very incremental process. But the fact that Putin has decided to publish his video this week as Witkoff is arriving just shows how aware he is that this narrative of Russian strength, Russian advances and Russia's inevitable victory on the battlefield is a big part of his plan to negotiate with the US.
All right, Ben, thank you so much for the context. That is Bloomberg's Ben Sills there. Here in the US, the White House is defending the Pentagon's handling of a September attack on an alleged drug-running boat. It's denying that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had given an order to kill everyone on the vessel. Joining us now is Suzanne Lynch, Bloomberg's Brussels bureau chief. Suzanne, you know, members of Congress and some legal experts are saying that a war crime could have been committed here, or we came very close to it potentially, and the White House is saying absolutely not. You know, is it possible that this accusation can be levied at the White House?
Well, the White House is pushing back strongly against this kind of increasing calls for clarification on what happened in this incident in early September. The White House press secretary said that a senior US Navy admiral ordered this strike. Now, Mr. Bradley is going to brief members of Congress on Thursday in closed session about this incident because, as you say there, members of Congress, both on the Democratic and the Republican side, have questions for the White House about what happened. This is taking place against a context and a background of increasing belligerence, increasing activity by the United States towards Venezuela and in this region. So I think this could potentially become politically difficult for Donald Trump, particularly if questions continue to be asked about the behaviour, about the authority of the US Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth.
Yeah, and then, you know, Suzanne, I also want to ask you about this story on the Bloomberg Today, an exclusive and story about how US companies are buying up rare earths. But they're rare earths that European companies aren't getting to first, and Europe needs them not just for, you know, industrial output and so on, but actually for armament, for arming itself. Tell us a little more.
Yeah, this is a key issue and a key challenge for the Europeans as they try to ramp up defence spending. It's getting hold of those valuable rare earths and critical minerals that go into everything from electric vehicles to defence equipment. Our reporting is showing that US companies are scooping up a lot of these rare earths ahead of European countries. Of course, this is coming, across a broad realisation across the world that companies, manufacturers have become overly dependent on China, which produces about 70% of the world's rare earths. So it's also coming on a week where the European Union will unveil its own strategy when it comes to critical raw materials. We're expecting that tomorrow. Bloomberg had details of that last night. And it's part of an effort by the EU to ensure that it can diversify and it can decouple, in a sense, from China as it tries to secure raw materials that are essential for its own competitiveness, industrial policy, and, of course, the defence sector.
All right, Suzanne, a highly read story at the moment. Thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Suzanne Lynch. Now, turning back to the markets, Bitcoin stabilizing today after tumbling, well, around 30% since October. A volatile start to this month, and the 24 hours previous to today was very volatile. We had an 8% drop at one point. Bloomberg Digital Finance Senior Editor Ana Herrera joins us now. So, Ana, what was the catalyst? We know that $1 billion worth of positions were liquidated, but was that the catalyst or was that the result of the price drop?
So that probably was the result, but it's sort of a circle with crypto, right? We know exchanges in crypto have these auto-liquidation mechanisms. So when the price drops, traders get auto-liquidated, which in turn creates more downward pressure on prices. So we've been seeing over the past month, it's not been very easy for crypto investors, both the institutional and the retail ones. And the retail ones especially, they had been investing, for example, in stocks that were sort of proxies for crypto, for Bitcoin, for example, Strategy, and the stock price for Strategy has also dropped. So all around, it's not been great for this segment.
Yeah, and some of those ETFs destroyed. I mean, there were leveraged strategy ETFs, right, that are just down, almost completely to zero. So, Ana, what happens next? We are seeing just a little bit of dip buying here, but we've seen that a few times and it hasn't prevented the slide. Is this the one? Is this the dip that does get bought?
There seems to be some resistance to buying in dips compared to previous cycles. I think there seems to be a bit more fear still that we might go down to 80,000. That would be the next level, and then where do we go from there? So there's some uncertainty. So let's see today. It's always hard with crypto to predict what's going on. It's been an extremely volatile asset class, and that really hasn't changed.
Exactly, and of course the crypto universe looking towards the FOMC for its own kind of clues as well. But, what are the catalysts that do move Bitcoin generally?
I think now we're seeing, historically, people have been looking at the Federal Reserve, but now the environment has broadened up a bit, and we see influence of other, macro factors. For example, yesterday, a lot of the downward pressure came from the BOJ and what was happening. So it is tracking more other risk assets, and some of the influence is no longer just tied to crypto. Because, for example, historically, people would look at, regulatory pressures just for crypto, but now the environment is quite good. In the U.S., you have President Donald Trump, who's a big supporter, and there's been laws passed that support stablecoins. So the environment has changed for crypto, but so now investors are looking more outwards at other signals.
All right, Ana, thank you so much for explaining all that to us. That is Ana Herrera in London. Coming up, we're going to get you set up for your trading day. We have earnings to watch and lots more. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Now let's have a look at what is ahead for today. So U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is meeting with President Putin in Moscow. We'll see if we get a readout from that meeting. Plus, Fed Vice Chair for Supervision Michelle Bowman testifies before the House Financial Services Committee. That testimony beginning at 10 a.m. Eastern. And then we do have a few straggler earnings. CrowdStrike, American Eagle reporting earnings after the close. Okta as well, and Marvell. Now, let's take a look at some movers before the bell. Warner Brothers Discovery, obviously with that deadline yesterday for another round of bidding, well, it's higher after Netflix reportedly offered a mostly cash bid, according to sources to Bloomberg. That's just one of the bids out there. Obviously, the other companies involved, Paramount, Skydance and Comcast, bidding as well. MongoDB up 23% right now. Strong results and boosted its forecast after the bell yesterday. And Marvell in advanced talks to buy Celestial AI in a cash and stock deal worth multiple billions of dollars, that according to the information. Let's have a look at the macro environment now heading into today, because it's a very different picture in the early going. So we have S&P futures now just tilted slightly risk on, partially because Bitcoin is also higher. It's above 87,000. But remember, in the 24 hours in the Monday session, it was below 84,000 and above 91,000, both in the same session. Let's take a look at yields. Perhaps they're a little bit more, reasonable. That's it for Bloomberg Brief.